Welcome to Banyen Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyen.com. Since 1970, Banyen Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyen.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Banyen Books podcast. I'm your host, Ross McKeechee. Really excited for our guest today, Mr. Peter Coyote. Coyote is an award-winning actor, author, director, screenwriter, and narrator who has worked with some of the world's most distinguished filmmakers. In 2011, he was ordained as a Zen priest, and in 2015 received transmission from his teacher, making him an independent Zen teacher. Coyote was a prominent influence in the Haight-Ashbury culture of the 1960s, with figures such as Janis Joplin and Gary Snyder. He is also an engaged champion of multiple causes, including being on the advisory board for Project Coyote, a national non-profit organization whose mission is to promote compassionate conservation and coexistence between people and wildlife. Recognized for his narration work, he narrated the PBS series The Pacific Century, winning an Emmy Award, as well as 8 Ken Burns documentaries, including The Roosevelts, for which he won a second Emmy. He was the on-camera voice of Oscar for the 72nd Academy Awards and the narrator for the 2002 Winter Olympics opening ceremony. He has acted in more than 130 films, starring in such features as E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Aaron Brockovich. Our honor is of several books, including Sleeping Where I Fall, The Rain Man's Third Cure, and a collection of poetry entitled Tongue of. Today, Peter Coyote Banyen Books in conversation about his new book, The Lone Ranger and Tonto Meet Buddha, Masks, Meditation, and Improvised Play to Induce Liberated States. A wonderful book developed through 40 years of research and personal study. Coyote's of mask-based improv games and Zen practices specifically designed to create an ego-suppressed state akin to the mystical experiences of meditation or the spiritual of psychedelics. Through his work, we also see how malleable the self can be and come to realize that the world is more magical and vaster than we thought possible. If you'd like to learn more about today's guest, you can visit his website, which is petercoyote.com. Banyen Books community, join me in a warm welcome for Peter Coyote. Peter, thanks so much for being here.
Ross, thanks. It makes me laugh to hear those introductions because they're so out of date. I've done 160 films. I've done 12 Ken Burns. One thing you'd mentioned was that was one of the two and still am non-native advisors to Leonard Peltier since before he went to prison. Yeah, and I've been involved in a lot of native issues, and I was glad to hear you cite ground that we all walk on and stole. The least we can do is acknowledge it. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's actually one of the themes running through this book, which is a fantastic book. You touch on Tonto. You've got this parable that alternates through each chapter as you're giving the description and exercises around the mask games and the different Zen meditation practices and the Buddhist way of seeing and thinking. There's this parable, and Tonto is one of the characters. Was there a reason that you chose the Lone Ranger and Tonto and your connection with the native peoples? Is that part of it?
Well, so there's a lot of heavy lifting in the book. There's a lot of these exercises are kind of lost leaders for Buddhism. If I take people into my classes and I stress them certain kind of safe ways with exercises and ways of moving that they're not used to, they run up into the edges of the self. They say, "Oh, that's not me," or "I don't like that," or "Oh, yeah, I feel real comfortable there." And after doing that for 4 or 5 hours, if a mask on you and hold a mirror up to you, it's never failed in 40 plus years of classes that your personality will exit and your mind will assemble some character from the self you see in the mask, in the mirror. So when your self goes, so does your self-consciousness, your second guessing, your self-criticism, all that stuff. You get about 10 free-form minutes, cold sober, to experience a kind of ego-free environment. And I use that as a lost leader for Zen practice, saying, so if you want to recover that, if you want to have access to that, you need to learn how to meditate, and you need to learn something of Buddha's description of reality. So when I was putting the book together, I thought, well, I'd like to have something a little more amusing than just in philosophy and exercise to talk about. And I thought about the Lone Ranger and Tonto, and I thought how he was like the epitome of a white man in like the 1950s when I was growing up. He represented only goodness. He had no contradictory aspects to his character. You know, he never killed anybody. And, you know, Tonto in Spanish means stupid. So it's just inconceivable today that you take a native person and you'd name him stupid on television. But as a kid, it was me. Tonto always knew what was happening. So these guys are riding around the desert. Their script writer died. They've been out of work. They're fat and out of shape. They're lost. And they see the Buddha camped under a big cottonwood tree. And they go over and he hops up and he takes such good care of their horse and finds out that Silver's lame and he wraps his in comfrey and stuff, that the Lone Ranger decides he must serve of a very, very wealthy man. And they'll just hang around and wait till he comes back. Maybe they can hit him up for a loan or invest in a movie or something. And of course, the Buddha sees this right away. And Tonto sees the Buddha. He kind of knows who he is, but, you know, he sort of starts out as the sidekick. And through the course of this thing, each of them have human problems, just normal human problems, greed, hate, and delusion that comes with having a body. So the Lone Rangers are all compounded because he was a star. He was a white man. He was like, had all of this privilege that he never saw. So little by little, the Buddha tricks them into doing a big job for him, and it's going to make them rich. And each one gradually learns how to meditate and gradually has some kind of enlightenment experience. And Tonto is the first, and they wake up one morning and his headband is on the ground and his prints are leading back to Mohawk country. And the Lone Ranger is flipped out. He said, "This is my musty sidekick. Where is he?" You know. So it was a way of putting a little fun in between all the philosophizing and the exercises.
It's really, really well done. No,
I figured if Sherman Alexie write about white people could write about Tonto.
You also have a quote Carlos Castaneda and Don Juan quite throughout the book. What's your connection with Castaneda's work?
Well, so I studied those books like they were the Bible for almost 20 years, and I learned almost every practice that you could practice from those books. And at the monastery where I lived, the only non-Buddhist books you were allowed to read were Don Juan books. And there were many conditions of meditative states that were recognizable from these early indigenous Yaqui descriptions. But then later on, I actually met Carlos, and he asked me to do the voiceover. So two of his books, and I did. And he did something to me that made me realize maybe he was going to take me on as a student. And I was really thrilled. It was really important to me. And then after I'd done the second book, he died. And I had this, there were certain exercises I just never did anymore because they were too scary about the notion that if I got lost, somebody would be there, would dig me out. But he was a real, long before Zen practice, he was a real guiding force in my life.
Wonderful. Now, back to masks. When you were a young man, you moved to San Francisco, and you joined the San Francisco mime troupe. You describe in the book your experience the first time you put on the mask on the Pantalone. Yeah. What happened to you there?
Well, first of all, I got to tell your friends and your listeners that mime is not pantomime. Like pantomime, Marcel, it's guys pretending to a window there and creating the illusion of object in space. But mime is much more like Charlie Chaplin, where you stick two forks and potatoes and you use them as little feet, and an umbrella could be a rifle or could be a sailboat. So the San Francisco mime troupe used 17th century Italian commedia dell'arte, which was street theater, and it was rude and sexy and vulgar and used stock characters to make fun of the rich and the wealthy and the pompous. And the masked characters were these stock characters, and we rewrote them to talk about contemporary American political issues. And we did our plays out in the where the people were. We assembled a little stage and made music, and we had great hot women with us, and we made our living passing the hat. And so the first time I put Pantalone on, I'd been exercising, working out. They gave me a character who was this old miser. He was really a terrible, mean-spirited guy. And I put this mask on him. I looked in the mirror, and boy, I was just gone. And it was my id was a colander suddenly, or my ego was a colander, and my id just leaked through it. And I realized that I could do anything as this guy. There was nothing that this guy wouldn't do. My first line ever on stage, which were just improvised, is I had this really whiny little pig of a daughter, and I introduced her to the audience. Also, Pantalone had a Yiddish accent like that, grandparents. And I introduced my daughter to the audience by saying, I love my daughter. I want to introduce you to my daughter. I love my daughter because she killed my wife in childbirth. And I knew I could get away with it. It was completely tasteless. Anyway, I sat on that experience for a long time. And then later on, when I was living in a monastery and doing zazen every day, they asked me would I teach acting to the children of the priests. And we had so much fun, some of the priests wanted to study. And all of a sudden, I started experimenting again with masks. And I began to notice that other people could have this experience of getting out of their own way. And that's what I call those classes, is I teach getting out of your own way. And the self, our personality, is like a tangerine floating in vast of space. And if you get outside the skin of that tangerine, your spinal telephone is plugged into every possibility. I mean, it's bigger, vaster than anything you can imagine. And that's where the real genius and inspiration comes from. Bob Dylan doesn't know how he writes songs. He may perfect them. He's a craftsman. He's careful, but the inspiration comes from someplace else. And it's the same for any artist. So Pantalone was like my experience, I had LSD by that time. So, but the difference between psychedelics is that when you take acid, it's like being flown to the Grand Canyon in a helicopter. It's awesome. The vista is phenomenal. It blows blind, but you got flown there in a helicopter. and you can't get back unless you have the helicopter. But if you walk there, if you get there, get meditating, leave crumbs for yourself so you can get back, and you've done it cold sober. And so in my classes, when people have these experiences, they realize they're cold sober. And so they've slipped out of their ego. You know, the ego is a guide. It's not an error. It would never have survived evolution if it didn't help us. Helps us brush our teeth and cross with the green and take good care of ourselves. But over a lifetime of being told who we are or implying who we are from the people greet us, it turns into warden, and it limits our freedom. It limits our possibilities. It stops being such a friendly guide. And so I teach people how to escape for a little bit.
Give all kinds of great exercises. I really like the red dot game. Can you tell us how that works?
Yeah, I can. So this is one of the ways when I talk about stressing people and showing them the edge of the self. So the exercise is that you imagine that there's a red dot like a laser that you can shoot anywhere on your body. And so when I first start, I put it on their nose and I have people be led around by the nose, and they just completely exaggerated. And I do that for 4 minutes, and I start cataloging their feelings, because their feelings are different. Some people feel like birds, some people feel like rodents, some feel nosy, some people feel offensive. And then we do it again, and I have them pull it back a little bit. So it's not quite so exaggerated. And then I have them do it just enough so they could go out in the street that way and walk around and see that how it changes the way they feel internally. And then the dot of their chin, and we start way out, we pull it back until gradually we're like this, and then put it on your chest and your stomach and your groin and your knees. And each of those placements will raise different emotions and different feelings and different associations. So if you're interested in acting, that's a little catalog. You're going to go in, if you find out that by raising your chin a bit, you feel incredibly confident, and you go into your job interview that way, nobody knows what you're doing exactly, but you can be responsible for your own moods. And so by the time you've bounced against the edges of yourself for a morning, there are other exercises where I make you respond without thinking. There's a circle game we play where we say we're at a rhythm, and the rhythm is unstoppable. And they will do a 4-beat line like, I went downtown and I stole a car. And everybody goes, do, run, 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 do, run, run. Then the next person has to start on the beat. And then people get comfortable with that, take away the way the run runs. And we start to add rhyme schemes. So the second guy has to rhyme with the first. The third guy starts a new rhyme. And so if you can't do it, you have to go blah, 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 blah. Look like an idiot. So it forces people to leap in with thinking. Maybe they're afraid of exposing psychological secrets or something. You know, when I went downtown and I kissed a man. Oh my God. You know? So by the time we've done that for a couple hours, people are really loose. They've found out it's a safe way to be, and it's supportive, but you've been really stretching your identity. You've really been pushing it against time, against not knowing. And those are the warm-ups to putting you in a mask.
One of the things you talk about is these personal identifiers. You say in chapter 5, you say exploring personal identifiers by which people know and express themselves, such as self-presentation, posture, intention, and a variety of games designed to illuminate habitually stuck areas. So what you're pointing to is these personal identifiers. Now, how does that relate to the Buddhist way of thinking of the self?
Well, it's not in contradiction. Mm-hmm. I mean, Buddha never said whether the self existed or not. What he did say, because that's a death end, what he did say it's not fixed. So most people, if you ask them, they have an idea that there's something in them that's them, that it's solid, it's graspable, Maybe it's a little tiny them behind their forehead, or maybe it's a walnut with their name on it tucked under their liver. But from the time you were born, everybody who spoke to you was describing the world to you. Look at mommy, what a nice cheek. Look at the kitty, look at the birdie. By the time we're 5 or 6, we can run the film of the world that we've been taught without help. And so from time on, we exist within the culture as it's been handed down to us. And one of the things we get is this idea of a self. You are a naughty boy. You know, what's the you? Well, you don't exactly know, but you better watch it. And so over a lifetime, we groom, we shape this you, we imply what it's like from the way people respond to us. We imply from things we think that could very well be wrong. And from those ideas, we have identifiers. Our posture will reflect whether we think we're, kind of no good and we'd rather not be noticed, or whether we're incredibly proud and we can't to take charge, whether our clothes are dirty and sloppy, whether we're trying to look wealthy. Because if you think that yourself is separate from the rest of the universe, we're nothing more than a little pea against the immensity of the universe. And everything becomes a strategy to deal with the terror of disappearing. But in fact, we come from an endless blade of human beings. Those human beings have never been separate from sunlight, from water, from mobs in the soil that nourish their food, from other people who make their clothes or their weapons or their grow. It's like, from one point of view, yeah, you're over there and I'm over here. We have this sort of separate identity, but from picture, we're like on the body of a dog. Everything is connected. So the reason that Buddhists talk all the time about emptiness, they mean empty of self. There's nothing in you that corresponds to an organ that makes yourself. So that's the good news, because it means that almost everything is alterable. It's not like you have an armature, like a sculpture, that's bent or distorted. So when we say things like, oh, I always do that, all we're describing is a habit. We're not describing the way you have to be. So all these things come up in these classes and in these exercises. And then the liberating thing is that if you have a bad habit, you can change it. It takes work, but you can change it. And one of the pieces of work that you do is you learn how to meditate and sit in undistracted silence with your body, mind, without distraction, and get to know it. To know the mind be the mind. You're not trying to shut it down. Death will do that. You're just letting the mind be the mind, and you're putting your attention on your posture and your breathing, and you're not letting yourself get jerked around by the mind. And then the mind's no problem. The mind is just a gland that produces images and thoughts and nonsense. When you need it, you let the clutch out and engage your awareness with it. But when you don't need it, you just put the clutch in and shift your awareness someplace else. What's the problem?
I believe Gary Snyder played a big role in your life. And there's a quote from a book where you talk about him when you first met him, and you said, "It required some years before I was able to pinpoint the most compelling and elusive quality of Gary's personality. He was the person I had ever met who appeared to be evenly developed across every dimension of his life. I resolved to learn something about that." For those who don't know Gary, maybe you can tell them a bit about who he was and the influence that he had in your life.
Sure. Well, I grew up, I was born in 1941. So by the 50s, the Cold War was started. McCarthyism and anti-communist disputes were starting. My people were Jews who were not yet allowed to be white. I couldn't join the country club. I couldn't go swimming with my friends. And so there was a lot that I was not so happy with. I had communists and socialists that were relatives. And I heard the government lying about them. These guys were just labor organizers and teachers and people looking for a common break for working people. They were not agents of Stalin, stuck into the culture. They were like Joe Rogan and the bombasts on Fox News. And so when I was about 14, I discovered the Beats. And I started reading these guys because these were adults who were as critical of my culture as I was, but they were adult. And they gave me references and reading and information. Sort of first among equals was Gary Snyder. Jack Kerouac, who wrote On the Road, also wrote a whole book about Gary Snyder called The Dharma Bums, in which the lead character was called Jaffe Ryder. And Gary was a champion freestyle mountain climber. He had lived for 9 years in Japan in a Zen monastery as the assistant to the teacher. And later on in the 60s, he had come back from Japan and he was writing environmental tracts that were being duplicated and passed out through the Haight-Ashbury. And they were very, very instructive. And I thought, and I was introduced to him through a friend of his named Welch, another poet who was my roommate, lived on the commune with me when his wife threw him out. And he brought Gary around. And Gary came in this new kind of Volkswagen camper, and we were this dirt poor, hard scrabble hippie commune living without electricity with a 5-gallon hot water heater for 20 people. And I thought, well, who was this bourgeois asshole? So I sat down, gave me some peanuts and butter. And he seemed completely interested in my revolutionary bona fides, telling him all the far out things that I'd done. I was waiting for him to recognize me as an enlightened Zen master. And then we'd discuss things as peers. That didn't happen, but he kept looking at me. He was trying to figure out who is this guy. And that look really unsettled me. I mean, it went right into bone marrow. And when he left, I thought, I got to get to know who this guy is. So I started going up to his place up in the Sierras. I grew up on a farm. I'm pretty handy, and I'd help him cut brush, logs, and do stuff. Gradually, we became friends, and I became the beneficiary of this vast encyclopedic organized knowledge that he had. And one of the things that most impressed me was his life. I mean, he had built this beautiful house up in the Sierras. It was kind of a cross between a Japanese farmhouse and an Indian longhouse, all cut from local timbers. He'd assembled a crew of Zen carpenters to put it together, and it had everything you needed, but there was nothing showy or grand. It was 900 square feet. When we came, everybody had to pump 100 pumps on a pump to pump water to up a holding tank so that it could back down by gravity, the water that you'd use. And so I saw in this house was the byproduct of 9 years of meditation, where he had thought through everything. Every tool had a tool to repair it and was right next to it. And so what I meant by being evenly developed is I was certainly unevenly developed. I was really smart. I knew I was smart. People told me I was smart, but I was using a lot of heroin. I was living not a particularly honorable life. I had bouts of kind of murderous temper and all sorts of stuff going on. And most people kind of like, if you're an American, have a great bicep, America will say, that's a fantastic bicep. Let's brand that bicep. We'll open a chain of supplement stores, or we'll get you a gym. You can go into training technology. You can sell sweats, yoga, Pilates. Zen does a little different. Zen would say, nice bicep. That'll take care of itself. Let's get the rest of the body up to that capacity. That would be an example of even development. Uneven development would be taking this one talent and pushing it as far as it could go, which is why you see many young musicians overdosing and dying and going crazy and unable to handle fame, because they have this talent, and the audience needs all sorts of qualities into these talent that don't have, and they're not balanced and able to deal with their life. So Gary was, I think of Gary as my first Buddhist teacher, even though we didn't have a formal relationship. But when I was ordained as a priest, we have these kind of, I'll show you just a second. We have kind of bibs that we wear, which are miniature Buddhist robes. It's called a raksu. And a Buddhist robe is a really intricate thing that's put together with many panels. It's sewed the patterns in a rice paddy. I don't know if you can see it. That's what it looks like. And then on the back, it will have, you know, names and dates and stuff from your teacher. And so Gary, although he was not my teacher left the space on my first raksu for Gary to sign it. And that was my priest raksu, which is black. And this one is brown. This was when you get transmitted. And this was made for me by a friend, and I wear it a lot. I like it.
Beautiful. Thanks for showing that. That's really cool.
It's the secret garments. It's like the Mormon underwear.
What you were talking about, it struck a chord. It reminded me of one of the games you talk about. You call the naked game, and you talk about self-consciousness and shame and your own child imaginings of how you wanted to change yourself and take on the qualities of various friends. Then you talk about this mirror game. Can you tell us a bit about that game? And then you also talk about our obsession in culture with attractiveness. So I'm wondering if you can dovetail those two.
So when I was a kid, both my parents were very hyper vigilant. My dad was a kind of amazing guy, not a great dad, but an amazing man. He went to MIT when he was 15 years old. He was the sparring partner of Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, who was light heavyweight champion. He could multiply 5 and 6 digit numbers in his head, and everything he touched turned to money until it didn't. And he lost everything. He died 20 million below broke. But in my childhood, both he and my mom were always watching to make sure I was okay, and any little bad habit or nervousness had to be stamped out or corrected. My mom read Freud like she read the Bible. And I always felt like there was something wrong. They were always angry. My dad was always angry. I thought my name was shit for brains till I was 16. And so I was 10, 11, 12. And he would always have this threat. He'd say, I'm going to snap your fucking legs and send you to reform school. And I didn't know what reform school was. It sounded bad. It sounded like maybe where they took us apart and put them back together in a way that would please their parents. So I used to imagine that I could remake myself. And I would look at friends, like this guy had a really handsome face, and this guy had a really slim, athletic body, and this guy had a lot of humor, and and I just would imagine that I pieced together something that was better than I was. So it never occurred to me these were all ideas and all things that I had implied about myself by the way people treated me. And my dad was very violent. He knocked me out in my first boxing lesson when I was 6. And my mom threw such a scene that from then on, he gave me wrestling lessons. And I think his fear was that I was this sweet, poetic kid and that I was going to get eaten by the world, and that it was as he had to toughen me up. And it took me many years to come to terms with violence and my own anger at bullies and stuff like that. So the naked mirror game is not actually a game. It's more like an ascent. And it involves standing in front of a mirror naked and just looking at your body and looking at your judgments of it. You know, just think, every time every guy takes his shirt off in the movies, he's a spectacular specimen of a human being. You know, of course, he has nothing else to do but work 6 hours a day in a gym and get ready for that scene. But most of it, you know, my idea of exercise is reading a heavy. So if the body doesn't correspond to these images, and especially girls, right? Because in this media age, you get social status dependent on your beauty and your attractiveness. I saw a picture of 5 13-year-old girls who were friends of my daughter's best friend. They're the daughters of my best friends. And I mean, they all looked 17. They were drop gorgeous, dressed like they were in their 20s. And they all somehow understood that desirability and attractiveness was their calling card. And they're good girls. They're sweet kids, you know. They don't even know they're dressing like whores because they don't know how the billions of advertisements they've already seen have shown them those options, that the prettiest girls are with the handsomest guys drinking the best beer or wearing the best t-shirt. So to stand naked in front of a mirror is to come to terms with what your body really is, and to explore those areas of shame. You have a little pooch in your belly. You have big tits or small tits, a big cock or a small cock. How do you feel about it? What does what really mean? And to catalog and interrogate those feelings and track the ideas behind them. Because the ideas imprison us, and the ideas take our freedom away, and the ideas make us vulnerable to teasing and criticism and bullying and all sorts of stuff. So one of the few things that I couldn't class was one of the advantages of writing this in a book. But I do other exercises with people where I work on stage fright. We do that dressed, but it's done in sort of the way. If I imagine you're sitting on an auditorium and you're addressing a room full of strangers, and this induces fears for anxiety in you, I tell you to look in the first 3 or 4 rows. There's somebody in there that you know that you're afraid of. Might be your mother, might be your father, might be an aunt, might be a teacher, but somebody that's been in your internal audience for your entire life, judging you, not giving you the benefit of the doubt, going for it. And then I ask you, how old are they? And the reason that I do that is because very often they're the age you were when you were somewhere between 6 and 12. So the next in the exercise is roll them forward to the present day, their present age. Are they still intimidating? If they're intimidating, turn the picture into black and white. If it's still intimidating, move them into the back of the room. If it's still intimidating, send them into a lobby and put them in a brown paper bag and put them on a bus. You've carried them around long enough and you've let yourself be bullied by this. And I can tell you any number of people that I cured of stage fright. I mean, by their admission. Michael McClure, a wonderful poet, friend of Gary Snyder's, would shake hard when he had to read poems. It looked like he had palsy. And we did that exercise. The next thing he was on the road with Banyen, who was the piano player in the Doors, and just traveled around reading his poems to jazz. So these are all, you know, mental tricks we play on ourselves that diminish our strength and power, that knowing about and illuminating and aerating can really help us.
Thank you. Now, before we get to our audience questions, there's one thing I wanted to ask you that it has a personal element for me. You talk about the emptiness teachings in Buddhism and some of the possible pitfalls or dangers around that.
Oh, yes.
And I had a friend, an old friend who I hadn't seen in a few years, but who committed suicide recently. he was known as a bit of a nihilist. You know, this done some study and came to the conclusion that, you know, nothing really matters in the
Yes.
end. I'm wondering if you can comment on these pitfalls and these dangers when it's not integrated with like a, as Juan says, or you path with heart.
I will. Yeah, I'm sorry that. It's so
Thanks.
disappointing. So the guy made a fundamental mistake. So remember earlier I said there are two ways. Ridiculous to pretend that you and I are not separate integers. You know, if I stick a pin in my cheek, you're not flinch. So that's one half of reality. That's, let's just call it, that's the relative. And we judge ourselves relative to other humans. Am I tall? Am I short? Am I fat? Am I thin? Am I talented? Am I not? Because everything is in relationship. Then there's the holistic view, where we look and I say, okay, not separate from oxygen, sunlight, food, water, pollen, insects, right? So each of them has a shadow. Each of them has a dangerous side. The relative side leads us to believing that we're the most important thing in the world, that we privilege everything we think and feel and want, and we don't realize that we're living within a bubble of our own creation, and we forget that we're living in all of it, and we wouldn't be here if all of it wasn't supporting our life. And so we can, the simplest example is, you know, we hunt wealth and power and things like that at the expense of others. And we run over. We do it as a nation. We do it as a country. We do it as organized sports teams, whatever it is. Identify with our ego in that. Well, the big picture has a problem too. And the problem with the big picture is that it loses track of the value of the smallest integer. A bumblebee is a miracle. It's not just a little tiny thing, it's a miracle. There's no accounting for it. A housefly washing its little face is a miracle, right? So when you lose track of that, the value of each unrepeatable integer of reality, you can be like Mao Zedong and starve 25 million people to death because you're building big picture. So and Stalin, who did another 20 million, trying to change the agriculture to create a communist world. So one of the reasons that all religions steep everything in a kind of moral oak is so we don't lose track of that relativity. Buddhist doesn't say nothing matters. It says everything matters. And so when you're going to build a shopping center, yes, maybe you have to take into account it's the last refuge of a particular butterfly or salamander. If you do that, you can maybe moderate it or do it so that can survive or put it in another place. If you never ask the question, you're saying none of this matters, right? So your friend who killed himself actually privileged his own thoughts over the miracles of the world that was surrounding him. He thought he'd figured it out, and he figured himself right out of life. And it's a terrible mistake, and it's a way of misunderstanding Buddhism. In early Buddhism, there was a belief that this, you know, so Buddhism grew in Hinduism. It grew out of Hindu culture. And to survive in Hindu culture, it had to gift wrap itself in a lot of the attributes of Hinduism. Just like when it went to China, it had to accept Confucianism and Taoism and wrap itself in some of the gift wrapping so it would be recognizable. Then it went to Japan and it had to wrap itself in Shinto and some of the Japanese practices. Well, one of the Hindu beliefs is this belief in life after life after life after life. Buddha didn't talk about reincarnation. That's something that was attributed, that kind of came along with the gift wrapping thing of Hinduism. And so the feeling was the purpose of enlightenment was to get you off the track of birth and death. Well, birth and death occurs in instant. That's what they were talking about. They weren't talking about getting out of this life as quickly as you could and never coming back. What kind of a religion has as its goal ending the life that generated it? So that's a really deep misunderstanding and misread. So when you meditate, every thought that comes up is an unrepeatable experience. You are an unrepeatable experience. And to end your life is tantamount to saying, I consider the point of view more important than the existence of dolphins, butterflies, mountain ranges, set, lovely girl, honey. I mean, it's a closing down. It's a myopia that engendered passion. But it's not what the Buddha taught. The Buddha did not teach nihilism. The Buddha taught how to have a happy, meaningful life on almost nothing. Before he gave his talks, he went out and begged his daily meal. He walked the walk, and then he came back and he taught people how to be happy in the world with a bowl and a row and just what you need to sustain yourself. My Buddhist tradition is a secular tradition, so I live in this world. I had children, I had 2 wives, I had 2 houses, I had jobs I had to do. I had a lot of contradictory claims, a lot of things I didn't care about. My task was to learn how to be happy in that world and to moderate the harm that I did by being greedy. I could say, well, I'm on nothing, but my 9-year-old rolled a certain kind of sneaker because that was what was important in his world. It meant a lot to him. So I'm not going to put my philosophy on him until he's old enough to understand it. So this stuff takes interrogation, not believing what you think, and sitting there and just watching until you begin to understand your own narratives and your own descriptions of the world, which are just descriptions. And your poor friend fell under the influence of a description. It's like mistaking the map for the territory. Do you see what I mean?
I do. Yes. Thank you, Peter.
Sure.
Very much. We've got some great questions coming in here from our audience.
Great.
The first one is from Donna, who says, being an indigenous person, I never knew the word tonto meant stupid Spanish. Mind blown about that one. With that thread and knowing how socialization occurs to the general public about demonizing indigenous people continues to occur, what are your thoughts about incorporating Buddhist beliefs to indigenous ways of knowing and being?
Well, I think that Buddhist philosophy is pretty harmonious with indigenous belief systems, at least all the ones that I know. I have a lot of friends who are Haidas up there. I've spent a lot of time with those people, Karak people, Yurak people, Shoshone people down here. The indigenous problem is the white problem, is the belief system of white people, of Christianity, of believing that it's the most important only religion on earth. Jesus never said he was the only son of God. He said he was a son of God. He didn't say you. He didn't say native people. Our bicameral legislature is based on the 2 houses of the earth, which Thomas Jefferson studied. That's why we have a Senate down here. So in many cases, like this race problem, it's a white problem. It's white people who've had privileges and advantages which have most of all been invisible to them. And right now there's an embarrassing movement in the United States where people are censoring school books because they think it's going to make their children uncomfortable to find out that their grandparents, great-grandparents were or bigots. But that's also depriving them of the opportunity to wrestle with being a human being and figuring out how to be on this world with other people. And I guarantee you that the educational systems of China, Japan, Shanghai, Indonesia, most of the world are grooming and training their children. The Brits and all the European nations, the Scandinavians, are training their children to excel. And we are training our children to remain stupid and blinded by prejudice. So one of the things that Buddha did was he violated all the caste systems. He admitted women. He admitted untouchable people. He admitted people from every tribe. And that was the organization that he practiced. And that was called the Sangha, the followers of Buddha. So one of the things that attracted me about Buddhism was, the Christians are pretty good about taking care of Christians. The Jews are pretty good about taking care of Jews. The Sioux are pretty about taking care of Sioux. But the Buddhists want to take care of everyone. There are no boundaries and no limits. And I thought that seems like something that's appropriate for a global reality. We have to learn to get over our differentiations of people by race, skin color, eyes, culture. I mean, if every culture on earth has the same definition of God, the creator, the initiator, the beginner, it doesn't matter what language they would call it. I mean, if God made all the people, he made all the vocabularies, he made all the different names. So to fight with somebody because he calls it Allah, and he calls it Kakantanka, and he calls it Jesus, he calls it God, it's just stupid. So Buddhism just sidestepped all. I hope that's an answer, Donna.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Donna, for your question. This one is from L, just initials L. The question is, anthropologist F.C. Bailey research included we wear up to 12 different masks during our day without putting on actual masks, but by adjusting to the expectations of people around us. Acting allows you to do that as well. Would you please share with us why you became an actor and how it differs from being a practicing priest? Thank you.
Wow, what a good question. So I became I'd been an actor in college. I was looking around. I was part of the black turtleneck sweater, camel cigarette poet guys. And a drama teacher in my college gave me a challenge. He was half in the bag all the time. And he sat down at the poets table and he said, "I bet it's never occurred to you that drama is an article of examination of something of great public import played out on the stage." And I said, "No, I never thought of that." So he challenged me to come audition for him. So I did. And he put together this company in the college. He said, the basketball team coach uses his A team. I'm going to use mine. And he made this little company. And so I did plays every year. And it was interesting and challenging. And then I was in the mime troupe. And then the mime troupe led me to this group, the Diggers, where we wanted to make more radical changes to the culture. And we didn't want to just be on a stage talking about it. And so by the end of the counterculture, I'd wound up with like a 10-year heroin habit. I was a single father. My daughter's mother had run away. My dad had died below. I broke. I had nothing. And Gary Snyder was appointed by the governor of California to run the state of the council, and he called me to help him. And the next year I was elected chairman, and we had a great run. We raised the budget from $1 to $16 million. We made art just go into every aspect of the culture, not in terms of producing goods, but in teaching the creative process, teaching how artists are creative problem solvers, and sending them into schools. And if we were going to do a mural school, they deal with the problem of discipline just as a byproduct. And it was so successful that I realized that I had sort of transcended counterculture. I had learned to work with conservative Republicans and Democrats and everybody. And I thought, why don't I just try the big board? Why don't I just try the movies? I have to make a living. I was living in the counterculture, I'd lived on $500 a year for 10 years. And now I had a government poverty job that was paying me $600 a month. So I gave myself 5 years to try the movies. And if it didn't work, I'd do something else. But I got lucky. And I started to I started to get jobs, and that was good. So acting was interesting. And when you act, you are calling forth all the characters or all the capacities in yourself. You're not exactly pretending. If I pretend to be angry, you're going to see I'm angry. You're going to see I'm pretending, and you're going to see that it's not connected to any emotion. And it's not until you connect behavior to an emotional truth that audiences feel it and believe it. And the more specific it is to you, the more totally they believe it. So at that time, I was acting, and I was doing intensive meditation and practicing and sort of going ground zero every day as meditate. And as an actor, you learn how to control your dials. So there's absolutely no difference between me watching a fly walk around the rim of a sugar bowl and my character watch a fly walk around the rim of a sugar bowl. But if I have to get angry, or if I have to come up with some emotion, I have to find something in the situation I can believe. And so the skill of actors is their skill to call their emotional life, to enrich what you have to do in the script. For Buddhism, it's a little different. Yes, we all wear these masks. We all go through everything from a heaven realm to us beings, to humans, to realms, maybe in the course of a day, maybe in the course of a lifetime. But in Buddhism, we're learning about the awareness that underlies all those things. We're learning about the generative force of the universe, which is just coming over your spinal telephone, which is just generating all this stuff. That's your real identity. And all the other stuff is stuff that's been laid on and put there, and you've gotten used to it. You've never seen outside. But when you meditate for a long time, your ego gets tired, and every once in a while it'll give up for a little bit, and you geek outside of it, and you get to see what's out there. Well, you can't stay out there. You couldn't live like that. Our ancestors had been so transfixed by a butterfly, they wouldn't see the saber-toothed tiger hunting them. But when you come back from those little events, it's kind of like seeing a little portion of the moon hidden behind thick clouds. The rest of the moon is there. And you see in the edge of the moon, the rest of the moon. And that's what an enlightenment experience or Kensho awakening is like. You realize that everything is a letter from emptiness. That the fundamental energy of the ocean is like formlessness. If you think about an ocean, and you think about little choppy waves, not big rollers, little choppy waves. Each of those waves comes out of the ocean, exists in for a little while, and then goes back to the ocean. Well, each of those waves could be a human being, could be a leopard, could be a dolphin, could be a mountain range, could be a culture. They come up into form for a while, and then they disappear. And when they're in form, we say it's living. And when they go back to the ocean, we say it's dead. But we forget, and what those little waves forget is they've never not been part of the ocean. Not for an instant have they not been part of the ocean. And we forget that as humans, because we have this idea that there's a little beetle in us, which is ourself. I can't tell you where it's located, what color it is, what shape it has, but I think it's separate from everything else, because we lost the other half of the equation, which is I've always been part of the ocean. And I have this time as the wave, dig it. I'm back into the ocean, be scrambled up, and will be up as another wave.
Thank you, Peter. Now, there's one last sort of big question, but before that, there's just a quick one. Tanya asking if you do any workshops. So for people to find out if you're still workshop work might participate in.
Yeah, the workshops are a little tricky in this age of COVID, but usually what I do is if someone's interested, they can write me at Peter at WD Prod, P-R-O-D. It stands for Wild Dog Productions. Peter at WDProd.com. and somebody has to get about 12 people together. And all day workshop costs $500. And I've got to fly there. Somebody's got to give me a couch to sleep on. And, we arrange to have lunch, or everybody packs their lunch. I still do them. I've been doing Zoom during the pandemic. It's not quite as successful. I've had to invent a way into using your cell phone to make a funny face in and take a photograph of it and use that as a mask. But it's not as powerful as the masks themselves.
Great. Okay. Thanks. Now, the final, so this is a potentially a vast question, but questions from Dawn, who says, what would you say about the polarization in society right now?
Well, it's kind of like the tip of the spear of American individualism. When you forget we're just a wave, we're part of the ocean, part of the nation, we're part of our state, we're part of our community. You can't be quite so intolerant, you can't be quite so ugly, you can't be quite so violent. So the polarization depends on several things. First of all, we have a 24-day propaganda network run by Rupert Murdoch, making a fortune, telling lies to stupid people. And they're taking it as fact. And we had a president telling lies to stupid people. And we have 120 members in Congress who are allowed to serve in Congress despite voting to overthrow a legitimate election. So one of the problems is there's no common source of facts anymore. When I was growing up, there were 3 networks. Each of the networks had a totally trusted news commentator, Edward R. Murrow, Walter Cronkite, and Brinkley. And they gave the nation its facts. So we might agree about what to do about them, but we didn't disagree about the facts. Now with social media and 150 channels and every moron with a Twitter account, there's a stable basis. They say, what's a fact? So my fear is that we could well be heading to civil war, unless maybe they put Trump in a jumpsuit and handcuffs. But even there were 70 million people that voted for him. And the entire Republican Party believes the election was stolen. Despite Republicans saying it was a completely safe election. So we have a huge impulse toward autocracy, toward fascism, attracting a lot of rich people. It is being well funded. The Koch brothers are paying to send videos of little local demonstrations in every TV station in the country, trying to make people think this is a mass movement. A few bullies invade the State House in Michigan with guns and bulletproof vests. And by the time it's been replicated everywhere, you think the whole nation is ready to be overthrown. So I don't really know what to do about it. I feel that you shouldn't be allowed to lie to the public airwaves and call yourself news. And in fact, Fox News is now registered as entertainment. But it's not good. And it's not going to get better for a long time, because now even the Supreme Court is being sent by legislators South saying, wow, we got these judges. Let's send these. They'll vote abortion. Well, that's just tells people the court, the political instrumentality. And once people believe that, you don't even have the law holding us together. So it's going to be a rough ride, folks.
Thank you, Peter. Folks, we've been in conversation with Peter Coyote about his latest book and more. The book titled Lone Ranger and Tonto Meet Buddha, Masks, Meditation, and Improvised Plays to Induce Liberated States. It's a really fantastic book. I highly recommend it. I want to give a big thanks to our audience. So great, so having people turn up live and create this community come together online, and for submitting your questions. A big thanks to Jacob Steele, who produces Banyen Books podcast and curates all of Banyen's events. Peter Coyote, huge pleasure to be in conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. It's been a pleasure. Give regards to all of Canada. I may wind up there.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast by Banyen Books and Book Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele. The show is edited by Abdul Habani, and I'm host, Ross McKeechie. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyen, or listen on your podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comment. We love to hear from you. For all our live events and books more, visit us at banyen.com.